I joked, "You'll get me in trouble." She just smiled, and somehow, I already was. The day had started ordinary enough. I had agreed, almost on a whim, to help her with a small task, moving a few boxes in her home office, something she insisted was no trouble, though I could see from the faint crease in her brow that it was. The air was warm with the subtle scent of coffee and old books, mingling with the faint perfume she wore, something floral, understated, and comforting in its familiarity. She stood by the doorway, arms crossed lightly, the curve of her shoulders relaxed but confident, her gaze appraising me with that curious mixture of amusement and challenge I had come to notice. She was older than me by a few years, enough that her composure carried a quiet authority, but there was also a softness around her eyes that softened the edges of her confidence. I offered to lift a box, teasing lightly, "Careful, or I'll get you in trouble with your own bookshelves." Her laugh was soft, a musical sound that caught me off guard. "Then you're doing it right," she said, the corners of her mouth tilting upward in a slow, knowing smile. There it was, the spark. Something in the way she said it, calm yet playful, made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. We were close, standing side by side as I reached for the box, and our hands brushed lightly. It was unintentional, casual even, but enough to send a current through me I couldn't quite name. My fingers lingered slightly longer than necessary, and I felt the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of her gloves. I noticed small details that day, how she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the slight tilt of her head when she considered my words, the way her eyes softened when she smiled. Those little moments mattered more than they should have, and I found myself leaning in slightly, drawn to her without fully understanding why. She watched me carefully, a hint of amusement in her eyes, as if she could sense my awareness of her in a way that made the playful tension between us thrum quietly. I tried to keep the mood light, making another small joke about how I should probably wear a safety helmet around her, and she laughed again, a soft, exhaled sound that felt like a gentle invitation rather than just amusement. Even in these ordinary moments, there was an intimacy I hadn't expected. The way our conversation flowed, easy yet layered with subtext, hinted at a connection neither of us were willing to name just yet. We weren't touching much, but the nearness of our bodies, the shared glances, and the brief brushes of skin created a delicate tension that hummed in the background. By the time the task was done, I realized I had been holding my breath in small, unnoticed moments, drawn into a dance I hadn't even realized had begun. She leaned against the doorway, hands on her hips, and gave me that same slow, knowing smile. There was a challenge in it, yes, but also a warmth, a quiet acknowledgement that maybe this, whatever this was just beginning. And in that small, ordinary room, amidst boxes and the scent of coffee and old books, I felt it, the faint, undeniable pull of something that promised complication, delight, and perhaps a little trouble. After that first day, a quiet rhythm began to form between us. It wasn't exactly scheduled, nor entirely intentional, but somehow our paths kept crossing. That afternoon, she asked for my help with a small stack of paperwork, nothing urgent, just the sort of mundane task that could easily be done alone. But her tone, lightly teasing, suggested she wanted company. As I settled next to her at the desk, our shoulders nearly brushing, I felt a familiar flutter, the same quiet current from our first encounter. The papers we shuffled together created small collisions, our fingers grazing as we reached for the same sheet, her hand brushing mine ever so slightly. Each time, I felt a momentary spark, an awareness of how near she was, the warmth radiating from her just enough to make my pulse quicken. "You're hopelessly careful," she said, her voice low and amused, eyes following my movements as I arranged the folders. There was a subtle challenge in her tone, like she was daring me to relax, to stop overthinking. I smiled, trying to maintain a casual air, but the slight hitch in my breath betrayed me. "I like to keep things in order," I replied, attempting to sound playful. She chuckled softly, that slow, lingering laugh that had begun to embed itself in my mind. We fell into a strange, delightful rhythm. Leaning close to reach a paper on the far edge of the desk, our elbows bumped, once, twice, and each time I felt a subtle jolt of awareness. The closeness was safe, yet charged, like standing on the edge of a quiet current, knowing it could sweep you along if you let it. She noticed, I could tell, the way my eyes lingered just a fraction too long. And her response was to smile again, a slow, deliberate smile that carried more weight than any words. The playful tension was punctuated by small gestures, a hand brushing a stray hair from her face as she leaned over to read a document, her shoulder just barely grazing mine when she adjusted her chair. Each contact was brief, fleeting, and yet full of intent I could feel as acutely as the warmth of her skin. There was an unspoken game in our proximity. I noticed the way she leaned slightly toward me when she spoke, the way her eyes sparkled with subtle amusement, and I realized she was deliberately inviting this closeness without ever saying so. I, in turn, found myself drawn into her orbit, conscious of every small movement, every glance, every inflection in her voice. At one point, she reached for a pen, and our fingers touched lightly. The contact lingered, just a second longer than necessary, and we both pulled back almost apologetically, though neither of us could hide the slight upward curve of a smile. That one touch spoke volumes, conveying curiosity, teasing, and a quiet recognition of the tension simmering between us. By the time the paperwork was done, the room felt charged in a new way. The playful teasing, the close proximity, the subtle touches, all of it had created a delicate intimacy, unspoken yet undeniable. And as I stood to leave, she looked up at me with that same slow, knowing smile, a silent promise that our small, flirtatious game had only just begun. It was a quiet afternoon when the air between us shifted, subtle but undeniable. We were sitting side by side on the worn leather couch in her living room, sorting through old photographs she had pulled from a box in the corner. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft stripes across the floor, across the table, across her face, and I found myself caught in the way the light softened her features, highlighting the gentle curve of her jaw, the delicate lift of her cheekbones. We laughed over a picture of her at a family reunion, the corners of her eyes crinkling in amusement, but then she paused on one that was less cheerful. She traced a finger along the edge of the photo, her eyes distant for a moment. I guess some things are harder to remember than others, she murmured, almost to herself. I didn't speak immediately, just shifted slightly closer, instinctively offering the space for her to share, or not share, as she chose. My hand rested casually near hers on the couch, close enough that she could feel the warmth without it being overt. There was a tension there, yes, but it was comforting rather than overwhelming. I've had moments where I've felt lost, she admitted finally, voice soft, almost fragile. Even when everything seems fine on the surface. I turned slightly toward her, giving her my full attention without intrusion. I understand, I said quietly, my voice calm. It's okay to feel that way. You don't have to pretend. Her eyes met mine, searching for any hint of judgment, and found only steadiness. A small, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips, one that carried relief, appreciation, and perhaps a touch of vulnerability she hadn't shown anyone else in a while. We sat in a shared silence for a moment, the kind that feels both heavy and comforting. My hand twitched slightly, tempted to reach out, to offer some tangible reassurance. She shifted closer, resting her elbow lightly against mine, a small but deliberate gesture. The warmth of her arm against mine sent a ripple through me, grounding me in the moment, making the ordinary seem extraordinary. I don't usually share these things, she said softly, almost a whisper. But I feel like I can with you. Her honesty struck a chord deep inside me. I felt a quiet ache, a tenderness, and the kind of protective instinct that doesn't demand anything but simply wants to be present. I'm glad, I said. I'm here. She let out a small exhale, leaning just slightly into my space without fully touching me. It was intimate in a way that words could never capture. The proximity, the gentle warmth of her presence, and the trust she extended made my chest tighten in a subtle, exhilarating way. We returned to the photographs, but the dynamic had shifted. Every glance, every smile, every accidental brush of our hands carried new weight. There was trust now, an understanding that the playful teasing and laughter had opened a door to something deeper. A connection not just of attraction, but of emotional resonance, a shared acknowledgement that we could be ourselves with each other, without masks. And in that quiet room, amidst sunlight and memories, I realized that the small sparks of attraction we had been dancing around had begun to ignite into something more profound. Something that might, eventually, become more than just a flirtation. The air felt different that evening. We had stepped outside for a brief walk, the sky painted in soft shades of amber and rose as the sun dipped toward the horizon. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from the garden nearby, mingling with the faint smell of her perfume, subtle, comforting, yet intoxicating. I noticed how the light caught her hair, highlighting streaks of gold and chestnut, and how her eyes seemed to reflect the colors of the sunset. We walked slowly, side by side, occasionally brushing shoulders. Each accidental touch sent a small shiver through me, a reminder of the quiet tension simmering between us. I found myself acutely aware of the space between us, small, almost negligible, yet charged with unspoken possibilities. At one point, she reached for the gate latch at the same time as I did. Our hands met, fingers lightly brushing. The contact was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my pulse quicken. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers linger near mine, just long enough to acknowledge the touch without overstepping any boundary. "You're dangerously close to getting me in trouble," she said, her tone light, teasing, but the slight lift in her eyebrow hinted at something deeper. I smiled, a little caught off guard by the undercurrent in her voice. "Then I must be doing something right," I replied softly, watching her carefully. Her lips curved in that slow, knowing smile that had begun to feel like a private language between us. The tension wasn't just physical, it was woven into every glance, every subtle movement. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, and I noticed the gentle way her fingers lingered near her cheek, the warmth of her skin catching the last rays of sunlight. My eyes followed, drawn in despite myself, and I realized I had been holding my breath slightly, captivated by the small, intimate gestures that spoke louder than any words could. We paused at the corner of the garden path, neither of us moving to step past the other. For a moment, there was nothing but the faint rustle of leaves and the quiet thrum of our own awareness. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something unspoken, interest, amusement, and a subtle invitation that neither of us dared to name aloud. The brush of her shoulder against mine as we continued walking, the way she occasionally leaned in slightly when pointing out a flower or remarking on the evening light, all felt deliberate yet effortless. Every movement was a quiet test, a playful dance of closeness without ever crossing the line. I felt both exhilarated and unnerved by the tension, aware of how much I wanted to reach out, to close the gap, yet equally aware that part of the thrill lay in restraint. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a silent acknowledgement that what we shared in these fleeting moments was special precisely because it remained unspoken. By the time we returned indoors, the quiet tension lingered, heavier now with the promise of something more. I couldn't shake the feeling that each small touch, each lingering glance, was a thread drawing us closer, weaving a connection that neither of us could ignore. And as I looked at her one last time before stepping away, her smile catching the last light of the evening, I realized that the slow, steady current between us had begun to feel unstoppable, quiet, simmering, and achingly inevitable. It happened one evening when we were alone in her living room, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The quiet hum of the city outside was a distant murmur, leaving us in a small, suspended world of our own. We had been talking, as usual, about everything and nothing, books, music, fleeting memories from childhood, but there was an undercurrent to our conversation, a tension that neither of us tried to name aloud. She leaned back slightly, tucking her legs under her on the couch, and I noticed how her posture invited proximity without demanding it. I was close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, subtle and steady, and I realized I was holding my breath again, waiting for the next small signal, the next glance, the next smile. "You know," I said, leaning just enough to catch her eyes, "if I keep teasing you like this, I might actually get you in trouble." Her laughter came softly, musical, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a spark I had begun to recognize. "Then you're doing it right," she replied, her tone light, teasing, but beneath it, I sensed something more. Something unspoken, something personal, almost vulnerable. I shifted slightly, careful not to close the space entirely, but close enough to feel her presence more intensely. Our conversation slowed, words softening, the teasing turning into a quiet pause that was heavy with possibility. Her gaze lingered on me, measuring, thoughtful, and I felt the tension between us deepen, charged not by proximity alone but by the emotional resonance in the room. I don't usually let people in like this, she admitted suddenly, her voice quieter now, softer. She looked down at her hands, folding them loosely in her lap, and I could see the vulnerability she rarely displayed. But with you, it feels different. Something shifted inside me. The teasing, the laughter, the playful tension, it had always been a dance around something more, and now she had acknowledged it. Without words, she had opened a door, and I could feel the air around us changing, thick with the possibility of connection. "I'm glad," I said, my voice low, steady. "I want you to feel like you can." She lifted her eyes to meet mine again, and for the first time, there was no playful deflection, no teasing edge, just honesty, raw and unguarded. She smiled then, slowly, knowingly, and the gesture was layered with warmth, relief, and something tender I hadn't seen before. We stayed like that for a moment, the quiet intimacy settling around us. I shifted slightly closer, careful to respect her space, and she didn't pull back. Instead, she allowed a subtle brush of her elbow against mine. That small contact, so light, so deliberate, spoke louder than words ever could. It was an acknowledgement, a shared understanding of what had been simmering between us all along. The teasing had evolved into confession, and the playful tension had blossomed into emotional intimacy. And in that gentle, suspended moment, I realized that the connection we shared was more than attraction, it was trust, warmth, and a slow, careful unfolding of hearts ready to lean toward one another. By the time the evening ended, the room felt lighter, yet charged with anticipation. The spark of teasing had grown into something tangible, something real, and I knew that the dance between us had only just begun. The rain had started softly that evening, a gentle patter against the windows that made the room feel cocooned and private. We were sitting side by side on the couch, a shared blanket draped loosely over our laps. The warm light of a nearby lamp cast a golden glow over her face, highlighting the calm confidence that had always drawn me in, and yet, there was a softness in her eyes tonight, a quiet vulnerability that made the air between us feel heavier, charged with something unspoken. She shifted slightly, and our knees brushed together under the blanket. The contact was accidental, or so it seemed, yet it sent a subtle thrill through me. I felt her warmth radiating in a way that was both comforting and electrifying, a quiet reminder of the intimacy we had been cultivating over weeks of playful teasing and shared conversation. "I don't usually do this," she admitted, her voice barely above the sound of the rain. "Sit, like this. With someone else. Feeling so calm." I turned slightly toward her, careful not to crowd her space, but close enough that she could feel my presence. "Then I'm honored," I said softly. "I like being here with you." Her gaze met mine, and for a moment, we just sat in silence. The quiet wasn't awkward, it was deliberate, filled with the weight of attention and care. She reached a hand instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead, her fingers grazing my skin in the most natural, unassuming way. The touch was brief, fleeting, yet it left a warmth in its wake, a gentle, lingering reminder of how present she was, how aware of me in this shared moment. I responded in kind, resting my hand lightly on her arm, just above the elbow. The contact was steady, reassuring, and it felt as if the world outside had dissolved, leaving only the two of us in a bubble of quiet intimacy. The brush of her sleeve against my hand, the softness of her skin, the subtle scent she carried, it all combined into a sensory awareness that made every small movement feel electric. We talked, but the conversation was secondary to the connection that pulsed in the space between us. She leaned slightly toward me, resting her head just above my shoulder for a brief second. The gesture was unforced, natural, and the closeness made my chest tighten with anticipation and contentment. I didn't move away, I let the moment stretch, savoring the warmth of her presence and the trust implicit in her subtle gesture. Time seemed to slow. Her hand brushed mine again as she adjusted the blanket, and this time, neither of us pulled away. We both lingered in the quiet, the simple contact grounding us, speaking volumes about the mutual understanding, attraction, and comfort we had built. By the time the rain eased outside, the room felt different. Not just warmer, but closer. The playful teasing, the stolen glances, and the soft touches had woven together into a tapestry of intimacy, emotional and physical, delicate yet undeniable. We didn't need to rush, didn't need words to define the moment. The closeness we shared was enough, and in that slow, deliberate presence, we had found something rare, a deep, mutual trust, a quiet desire, and the gentle promise of more to come. The evening had settled into a gentle calm, the kind that follows a day of quiet reflection and shared presence. We were sitting together on the balcony, the night air cool against our skin, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine from the garden below. The city lights flickered softly in the distance, but all I could see was her, the way the lamplight caught her hair, the subtle curve of her lips as she smiled, and the quiet warmth radiating from her presence. We had been talking intermittently, not about anything urgent or pressing, but about small memories, fleeting thoughts, and the odd details of our day. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by laughter, soft sighs, and the occasional comfortable silence. In those silences, I could feel the weight of our connection, the shared glances, the lingering brush of shoulders, the way her fingers occasionally hovered near mine, as if testing the waters without fully crossing the line. At one point, she leaned slightly closer, resting her hand lightly on my arm. The gesture was simple, unassuming, yet it carried everything that had been building between us, trust, attraction, and the subtle promise of intimacy. I returned the touch naturally, letting my fingers brush against hers, and the warmth of that contact settled over me like a gentle reassurance. "You know," she said softly, her voice low and almost hesitant, "I never thought I'd feel this comfortable with someone again. Not like this." Her words struck a chord deep inside me. All the playful teasing, the quiet tension, the shared moments of vulnerability, it had led to this, a calm, mutual understanding that what we had was rare, delicate, and deeply rewarding. I met her gaze, letting my eyes linger on hers for just a moment longer than usual. "I feel the same," I admitted, my voice steady but gentle. "Being with you, it just feels right." She smiled then, a slow, knowing smile that seemed to take in everything between us, the playful glances, the teasing remarks, the accidental touches, the quiet moments of honesty. It was a smile that said, "We found each other, and it's okay to let it be this way." We sat in quiet contentment for a while, the night wrapping around us like a soft, protective blanket. Occasionally, our hands brushed, sometimes lingering slightly, sometimes pulling back with gentle acknowledgement. Every small contact felt charged, meaningful, yet comfortable, a balance of closeness and respect that made the connection between us feel both intimate and enduring. By the time we rose to go inside, there was no need for words to define what had passed between us. The playful teasing, the quiet confessions, the subtle touches, all had culminated in a shared understanding. We were connected, not just by attraction, but by trust, warmth, and a slow, deliberate building of emotional intimacy. As I watched her close the balcony door, she glanced back at me, that same slow, knowing smile in place. In that moment, I realized the tension that had simmered for so long had transformed into something steady and enduring, a gentle, mutual desire that didn't need to rush, didn't need to shout, and didn't need to prove itself. It simply existed, quietly powerful, and entirely ours. And in that serene, shared moment, I felt a rare and satisfying certainty, that our slow-burn connection, built on teasing, vulnerability, and tender presence, had reached its natural, warm, and beautifully inevitable resolution. If you enjoyed this slow-burn romance and the way a simple smile can speak volumes, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next story. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt a connection that grew slowly, quietly, and unexpectedly?